No, I'm here. I'm still here. Hi everybody. This is gonna be fun. We're doing a fun episode today. This is the airing of the Grievances 2023 with some great guests, some alumni. Slowly, I realize slowly the show is becoming the Matteo Capasso show. The last six, the last like 6 episodes are with him or feature him, but that's okay. I feel like Ethiopia in the 19th century. I'm getting slowly
You're just
dominated.
continuous Italian encroachment and attack, cutting you off from the sea and
It's the
losing
Renaissance.
battles, just losing every battle though. Like, yeah.
um, so this is going to be this episode the origins of this episode are Matteo insisting over WhatsApp that he needed to talk about Ukraine and he needed to share his mind. So and Justin and I threatened this too last episode. That we had to do
Yeah,
a Ukraine
I've
episode because
explained
I've been noticeably
why
silent on mine, noticeably at least to me, given
why
the
there.
scale
I
of my
kind of have a
opinions on
list
the
of
matter.
reasons
Oh fuck,
why
there I go.
I didn't want to
That doesn't
touch
stop.
this,
That's
and like we can go over
You mean Ukraine, Justin?
what. Yeah, I can't remember. Is that what we were talking about? What was that word again? I'm in Toronto, you guys. You guys don't know what it's like here.
There's a lot of Ukrainian flags. When I was there in November, there's almost as many Ukrainian flags on people's houses as there are in the so-called liberal progressive Bay Area.
Oh my god, that's a serious
yeah,
situation.
which is
Sina, you cut out, so I just took over as if I was you. I was using access to our hive mind to just finish your sentence for you. Yeah.
Seen, I got agency.
He has agency. Oh yeah, I have grievances about that too. But let's take. We should take Matteo first. Yeah.
Honestly, I mean, I have to thank you all first because yes, I did push for this episode, but as I was saying to Sina, as men, we are socialized not to share our usually we share too much, we rationalize too much things. I think this episode for me is about sharing my emotional state.
It's a therapy session. It's a therapy.
I love it.
It's a therapy session. You know, I am not gonna have final insights or gonna save anything. I'm gonna have more questions than anything. And I hope you will guide me to see the light out because I can't see the light right now.
Okay, well, go, take it.
I don't know. I mean, first, thankfully, we don't have this culture of flags here. So thank God I don't see many flags hanging around Italy. Not so much. I mean, there used to be one. The municipality in my hometown used to have this blue and yellow light up there. It's not happening anymore. We just have a big banner about Iranian women now. Sina, this is for you anyway, just in case you want to.
Totally unprincipled. Just
We also have those. We have those with the Ukrainian flags. We have the Women Life Freedom banners. So I'm familiar with those.
And that's, I mean, what I just really struggle on a daily basis is it's not how we got to this point. I'm able to formulate, to elaborate, to verbalize how we got to this point and NATO and the expansion and all that. But how are we able to find and to grieve, to express our political grievances in a grammar that is not fascist? Or are we doomed to stay in that place? That's one question. The second one is, okay, in a realist war, technically, war is fundamental to rebalance geopolitically the situation. Let's say somehow Russia is facing the US militarily. That's changing. Things are changing, okay? But when war becomes so key to the political and economic system, that system feeds itself of war, then where is the limit? Are we going to put a limit morally, politically, to when are we going to say enough to this war? And I know these two questions are interconnected, but I really struggle because I see the state, and this is what's really worrying me, the state of the left in Europe. It is disgraceful. It is absolutely disgraceful. I don't know how it's looking like from where you're sitting, but it is, I don't know. I just don't know. I'm about to get angry, so I'm just going to pass it on. Anybody.
Okay, I have a couple of reactions. One, it's however bad it is in Europe, I suspect it's worse here. Yeah. So, and what I mean is, like, anti-war is like a joke now. Like, you say that phrase and it's like a funny thing to say. Like, oh, it's those anti-war people. So, and you don't even have to explain what that means. It's sort of like the package. You know, it's interesting because you talked about grammar, because it's like the package of the rhetorical package that comes as a entire, you know, pre-packaged sandwich that you unwrap when you try to talk about this is already like, okay, well, the word anti-war means pro-Russia. The word, you know, anti-imperialism means pro-Russian imperialism. The word Ukraine means freedom. The word Palestine means, why don't you care about Ukraine? The word Africa, right? The word Africa means you're doing whataboutery because you don't really care about Ukraine. The word Nazi means Putin talking point. So, like, there's a glossary. There's a glossary where every single phrase that you might try to use to have a conversation is automatically pre-translated by the person, and they're already ready, so that there's it's a completely sealed, closed universe, and you can't get in. There's no linguistic entry point to it whatsoever. And I think that's part of your, you know, the frustration that you're talking about. And I'm not sure what you meant when you said, like, is there a grammar that isn't fascist? But, like, that's what I thought of when you said it, which is like, there is absolutely no way to have a conversation with somebody that isn't just like a set of symbols, and like you instantly identify who they are and you instantly identify who you are, and then there's like really no need to talk anymore. There's like you know that joke about like the guy who the young comedian. So there's the young comedian who goes
Zelensky?
to this no, yeah, exactly. so let's call him Zelensky. So he goes to this comedy club, and there's a bunch of old comedians, okay? And the old comedians are sitting together at a big table, and the young guy sits next to, you know, one of these older guys, and an old comedian gets up and he goes, "Number 12," and then all the comedians go, and he sits down. And then another one gets up and goes, "Number 40," and everyone goes, and they sit down. So the young guy says to the comedian beside him, he says, "What's going on?" And the old comedian says, "Well, you see, everybody knows all the jokes so well that you don't have to say the whole joke. You just identify what the joke it is, and it makes everybody laugh." And the young comedian gets up and he goes, "Okay, all right." And then he gets up and he says, "Number 4," and nobody laughs. And the old man next to him says, "Well, it's all in how you tell it, you know?" but like that's where we are. Like, you just say one word. You just say, like, so for me, the biggest frustration for me about this specific Russia-Ukraine is I always try to give a fair hearing to the other side. So like with Syria, with Libya, I tried to give a fair reading to the people who are like, well, Assad has to go. He's done all these things, so Assad has to go, or Gaddafi has to go, blah, blah, blah. So I give them a fair reading. The issue that I cannot get past with Ukraine is, okay, Ukraine wins. Ukraine has, finally wins and repels the Russians. What happens to the Russian speakers in Ukraine? What happens? What's the plan? What happens to them? What's the plan to prevent them from getting genocided? Just somebody tell me that plan, and I'll hear you out. But like, the status of the Russian speakers in eastern Ukraine is not, it's just not there. It's not in the picture, and I cannot resolve the humanitarian problem in my mind. And so I cannot buy any of the rest of this pro-war package, because I cannot resolve this one. So that's the one, and that's the one where if you say, okay, you know, Donbass shelling, 14,000 people murdered over 8 years, they're just like Putin talking point. And like if you go on Wikipedia now, it's like called "Where were you for 8 years?" There's like an entry, and it's like, "Where were you for 8 years?" as a Putin talking point used by pro-Russia people. So yeah. So anyway, I feel you. If that's what you meant, that's what I got out of it. Yeah.
I feel like that sort of like manipulation of language and grammar and saying things are something that they're inherently not, or vice versa, came out of this like reactionary pearl clutching culture after Trump was elected, at least in this country, where like automatically you know, people looked at Trump and, you know, the wider kind of like social landscape in this country that is turning far, you know, hard right, as like, I mean, it always kind of was hard right, but like more nakedly so, at least, as like this this aberration, this like this mistake that was made somehow, and you know, and like, so anything that Trump did, you were automatically against, obviously, and that turned into like this huge commercial gift to, you know, to the corporate media, who then said, you know, that anything that Trump says is a lie or a talking point, for, you know, like manipulated by other leaders, for example, Putin, or, you know, or whoever was like, you know, the adversary at the time. And the liberal class has completely taken that and run with it, so that people who used to be on the so-called left or were somehow anti-war, you know, marched in the streets, or, you know, like, you know, even protested against the Vietnam War, who had like actual like anti-war political principles, now have been completely consumed by whatever MSNBC and CNN and the New York Times says they should be concerned about, or they should be against, or they should be for. And so the language of that, like, you know, thinking intellectual people who, you know, you kind of count on for their opinions in other times, are now saying that, yeah, that Russia is imperialist, that China is imperialist, that we should be supporting the, you know, the Ukrainian military, that don't, you know, that the Nazi faction in Ukraine is very small and not influential at all. Don't worry about that. Or my favorite is, well, there are Nazis everywhere, sort of thing. Meanwhile, words have become to mean nothing. And Zelensky's Jewish, so how could there be a Nazi problem in a country where the leader is Jewish? Just like how apparently racism had ended under Obama, right? Like all these, I mean, it's just completely like it makes me insane, how people are not looking at objective facts anymore, and have thrown whatever was left of their political principles out the window in order to, you know, be in complete lockstep, to conform to whatever narrative, you know, the literal U.S. empire and European, you know, imperialism is wanting them to accept and believe. And it's just, I don't know where we go from that, other than like just hit the reset button and start all over. Cause like, I don't, like,
well, oh, do you want to jump in, Matteo?
No, I was just thinking in all this, I mean, following up what Nora was saying, are they realizing that there is a war between two major F powers that they could really go and use nukes. Like, are they aware of this? And this is what's really, gets me really angry. Freedom what? I mean, this is not about freedom. You're really fueling a conflict that is really major. Have you any, fucking ideas of what is actually happening here?
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, they don't. Or they don't care. Or they don't even think about nukes anymore. They don't even... that's not the clear and present danger that it always has been anymore for these people. Because
Putin's bluffing. It's like wishful thinking in every case. But I wanted to say another few things, because when Sina and I talked about why I didn't talk about this, there were a few reasons. So one was the grammar issue, right? The syntax issue, maybe, to be more precise. But another issue is like the identity issue, right? So like Canada, Toronto specifically, I don't know how much it is in liberal. Nora, you can be our anthropological informant about the US, but like here it's like, if you're from the place, there's a special kind of thing that you have, unless you're not saying what they want you to say. So like if you're Chinese and you're pro the Chinese government, obviously that's not really the kind of Chinese we want to hear from.
Well, you've been brainwashed, obviously. Yeah.
But like if you're Palestinian, you're pro-Israel, or if you're like Jewish and you're pro-Israel, then oh boy, do we want to hear from you, right? And like, but then so the third part to that is like, if you're not Jewish and you're not Palestinian, and you're like, gee, there's sure is a lot of injustice against the Palestinians going on. People are just like, who the hell are you though? Like, what's it to you? Like, are you some kind of brown anti-Semite or whatever? Like, this is like, there's like a lot of resentment, including from like liberals who are Palestinian. Like, there's a lot of like, this is our thing. Like, stay in your lane, right? And like with Ukraine, it's quite extreme. It's sort of like, it's like, first of all, I felt like there's no way to talk about this. And second of all, it's like, nobody cares what I have to say. Like, absolutely nobody wants to hear from this like internationalist brown guy what he thinks about two groups of what my spouse calls two groups of heavily armed white people fighting. It's just like, shouldn't we just let them fight it out? And like, so there's that element of like the identity aspect. And when it combines with, the fact that it is white people and it's like white supremacy, like the whole thing has a kind of a Nazi white supremacist thing going on. Maybe it's a small part of it, maybe it's not such a big deal, but like, there's this, like, I don't want to force my way into this discussion at all. I really feel like, nobody asked me for my opinion and nobody wants to hear what I have to say. So like, I find myself really, like you were saying, Matteo, like this could be like, we could just not wake up one day because everything's nuked, or we could wake up into like a post-apocalyptic scenario, and then I'd be like, oh, I bet that was Russia-Ukraine that did that, I wonder what it was, but it might have been Russia-Ukraine. But like, so I'm fascinated and I'm following it and I know an incredible amount about it, but like, I'm not talking about it because, yeah.
But here's the thing, though, is that like we've evolved in this time. Like we've now, like, our political sensibilities, so to speak, have evolved in this neoliberal era. And as you said, there is this kind of hyper fetishization of certain voices and policing the boundaries of some discourse. But here's the thing: these things don't exist. Like, there's no discussion. These are just figments of the liberal imagination. There's no public sphere. And like, if there was a public sphere, it was nuked by the internet, because it's just people talking. So like, I've had the same problem you had, Justin, and we talked about this on our last therapy episode. We should just have therapy every month. I could just pay you, but you pay me. So where's the sense in that? But like, ultimately, like, there's an audience for this show, and it's the people who are listening or watching, and they come to us presumably to learn, and from that the benefit of that learning, that analytical skills that all of you have cultivated in your professional life.
Yeah, I think it's real, and I was going to say I think it's really important for people who already have, like, we are our it's not just our friend group. But it's the left that is growing smaller and smaller and more condensed, and will probably implode into an alternate universe someday. But I think it's incredibly important and de-alienating to have discussions like these. Even if you're not like, I'm not a total expert on the Russia-Ukraine history, but I can, like, I smell bullshit when I when I know it, you know what I mean? Like, we have to maintain this level of skepticism and like, not, whenever I see people, liberals take, like I was saying off air, like when they take down the Black Lives Matter placard in their window and they put up a Ukraine flag, that signifies something to me, that something isn't right, that all of a sudden, whatever is like the new popular thing to be performatively outraged about, or performatively, in solidarity with, whether it's, Black Lives Matter, whether it's, the Iranian women that they only just learned about yesterday, or whether it's Ukraine, like, that's really troubling. And we should all be very, skeptical of that trend and how that forms, and if we try to have, like, just ask questions like, well, what do you know about Ukraine? What do you know about Iran? What do you know about Black Lives Matter and the history of policing and racism and settler colonialism and enslavement in this country? Like, when you start asking those questions, there will be a lot of pushback, and that's because they're insecure about their position, because they're being told what to believe by the ruling class, by the weapons manufacturers masquerading as, pundits on Rachel Maddow's show. And so I think in order to feel less alone and less insecure in ourselves, we need to keep having these discussions, because otherwise, like, we're just out here alone, feeling like we're in grief, like feeling like we're going crazy.
Well,
Yes.
There was a little quip. I didn't want to interrupt you, but you said, this is not just our friend group, but the left. And I was like, is there a difference? Oh,
I know. Well, that's it. It's like, it's really just like, it's just like 5 of us left at this point, Like,
I agree. My partner always says you are 4 dogs.
Who's the 4th? I'm always like, who's the 5th? Nora said 5. Like, wait, 5. Why isn't the 5th guy on the show?
I know.
No, but there's sorry. Do we want to go back to Matteo? Did you have more?
No, I want to pick up on what Nora was saying. Is I wonder how much this performativity that we have today, this kind of positioning ourselves over something, does really allow space for an historical analysis. Because we are living in the present constantly, and we are positioning ourselves on whatever pops in front of us. And I agree with you that asking questions and learning a little bit from the past, and that's what I've been trying to do, but I don't know. I'm getting really existential and philosophical in a way. I mean, I know, because when I look back and I can explain, at least I can create my own narrative. Okay, fine. But when I speak with someone who's, who's just swapping, or who's just listening, and he just, absorbs the present, and he doesn't have time, he doesn't have willingness. I don't know. Is this, at the end of the day, reminds me that this was the kind of the art movement that actually the fascists really spearheaded back then, which was living in the present. Boom. So I don't know. It's a kind of a conundrum for me to really. I don't find a way. I don't know. I'm just blocked. I'm literally blocked. And I know there are 4, 5 dogs. How many there are there? But
you gotta bark a little louder. But I have a genuine intellectual issue that you guys can help me with, maybe, because my problem is I trust my instincts. I do. Except in certain cases when I'm like, oh, I don't have an instinct here, so I don't know. But here's what I do. I trust my instinct, because in 1999, 24 years ago, was like some of the first anti-war protests that I went to as an adult. And that was like over the NATO bombing of Serbia, the former Yugoslavia. They were breaking up Yugoslavia. They were bombing Serbia. And the issue was Kosovo was breaking out of Serbia, and NATO was helping Kosovo break out of Serbia. And Serbia was saying, no, this is part of Serbia. And, mainly after, which is a point Chomsky made over and over again, after the bombing started, there were actually more atrocities towards the Albanians in Kosovo by the former Yugoslav army. So it actually, whatever issue there was made obviously 10 or more times worse by the NATO bombing. But, there was an issue, right? The Kosovo Albanian, probably lots of people, since the West had broken up Yugoslavia already, Croatia was gone, Bosnia was gone, etc. So Kosovo was like, why shouldn't we go too? And Serbia was trying to draw the line and say, no, like after all of these people, you can't go too. And now Kosovo's not independent. It's some kind of actual occupied NATO protectorate. It's got a pretty bizarre status for people who want to look into what happens to you when NATO helps you become independent. 25 years later, okay? That's what your independence looks like, a quarter of a century later. So, but like on the surface, that looks very similar to what happened in Russia, Ukraine, right? Like Ukraine is saying these Russian speakers have to be part of Ukraine. The Russian speakers, sponsored by an outside power, I think it's fair to say, there was some support for them from that country called Russia, maybe. I'm willing to concede that. So with support from Russia, we're saying no, we want, like they were willing to be part of Ukraine, but not on the basis of like anti-Russification laws and no support for their language and their kindergarten, their kids having to be in basements instead of being in kindergarten and whatever else the plan was for them. So now a lot of liberals that we talk to, or, that talk at us or whatever, however you want to put it, are kind of like, they believe that, yes, Serbia should have been bombed for forcibly keeping Kosovo, and that Ukraine is correct to forcibly keep and subjugate the Russian Ukrainians. And I am on the opposite side of both issues. I don't think it was a good thing to bomb Serbia and turn Kosovo into whatever it is now. And I don't believe that again, as I said at the beginning, I don't believe there's any resolution of this conflict without giving something to the Russian-speaking Ukrainians in Eastern Ukraine. What I have not found is anyone who's consistent on both of those. So there's nobody who says Kosovo has a right to go and the Russian speakers have a right to go. There's nobody who says Kosovo didn't have the right to go and the Russian speakers should be forced to stay in an oppressive Ukraine. So the anti-war people are like me. They're against the NATO 99 and they're against NATO. They're against NATO in both cases. But so why? Like, can you guys explain why this inconsistent position actually makes sense? Because I know it does, but maybe we can talk.
Because politics isn't about, it's not about some sort of principled stance. Like, oh, am I muted? Is that better? Can you hear me?
No, you're good now. Go for it.
I should have not spoken. Every time I speak, I cut out. Okay. Well, I mean, part of the problem is that like it's something bigger. There's a philosophical issue, which is like our location as individuals and how our subjectivities are framed through these geopolitical conflicts that are far away from us. And the only tools we have to debate them, to talk about them, to discourse around them are these small little websites and internet communities that have been built up, that have gradually advanced in technological character in our lifetime. So it went from like Usenet groups to social media apps, right? And that has been its own technological story inside of that. But ultimately, it's the same problem, is that like our opinions, in the grand scheme of things, because we don't have a democratic culture and we don't live in a democratic society, our opinions don't mean anything to the power, to the elites and the people who have the stakes in all of this, who hold the stakes. They fight their wars irrespective of our opinions. The vast majority of our countries were against the Iraq War. Far more people were against the Iraq War than they were supporting. It didn't stop them. So ultimately, like we're sitting here debating like how come the sentiment isn't different. But it's like, yeah, it doesn't matter what the sentiment is. 99% of us were against the war. Were against supporting Ukraine. It wouldn't change anything because the powers that be don't care what we have to say. So then, why do we talk? Like, what do we say? Like, do we talk? Do we just talk anyways? And yes, obviously the answer is yes, because just because like you don't have a say in the matter doesn't mean you agree to that and say, okay, fine, I'm gonna take my Coca-Cola and sit down and binge my Netflix show and shut the fuck up as you want. However, the tiny amount of people who choose not to do that, who say like, okay, I'm interested in learning about this, they seek out shows like ours and they seek out people like us who do have opinions, and you can argue about the quality of those opinions. I'm sure we'll have a bunch of fucking NAFO trolls show up under the comments here, whatever, let them. But ultimately, like, it comes down to the individual and how they're going to relate to these geopolitical events. Are they going to say something or are they not going to say something? What's interesting now is that in effect, it makes us the primary vehicles, but like we're both the subject and objects of InfoWar now. Like we're doing the info warring and we're the objects of the info war in our sphere, because like which is crazy to think about, because like the people who matter, their minds are made up, right? Like the people in Donetsk, the people in Crimea, the people in Luhansk, right? Like those are the people who matter. The people in Syria, the people like those ultimately those are the people who matter in all of this, and that they're subjects of the info war, and maybe a lot less, but in the sense that like that it didn't work on them is kind of like that's what's really at stake in all of this. For us, we just fight over it. It's just, I don't know if I ever said this on the show before, but like I was like in an organic farm in France for like 15 years ago, and there was like these herding dogs. They had cows. I mean, they babysat cows and also had their own, but they were wild cows. They stayed in groups and kind of wandered in the mountains in the Pyrenees. And they had these Pyrenees dogs, these Pyrenees mountain dogs in the Pyrenees. I was like, oh, it's like where you wear the name of the band to the T-shirt of the concert. It felt like that. I was like, oh, this is where it makes sense. But they would never use them. They just hung around like playing, like I don't know what they were doing, just being dogs, but like they were never working. And I asked the owner, I said, like, what? Like, when do you take your dogs with you? Like, because he was going to sort of herd that day, and I was like, do you take your dogs with you? He's like, no, I don't need them. And I was like, but don't. So why? He's like, yeah, I bring them along just for them, for their own entertainment. And that's what it feels like. Like, it feels like this is for our own amusement at the level of neoliberal, like capital individualist experience. Like, this is just for our own fun. Now, mind you, it's not fun to sit and have these conversations. It would be a lot more fun to sit and like chew over the Barbie movie or whatever. And I'm not putting down anybody. I'm not saying it's no moral. It's more moral what we're doing, or more capital I important. But ultimately, like, these conversations, we can make them fun in like just as subjects, but like the subject matter here is not fun. It's people dying. Like yesterday, I saw these dead bodies I see so much killing on my Telegram, so much death, like terrible, terrible things. But because we're like the end user of the info war around it, all we can do is be like boo or like yay, like that's what it comes down to. And like hopefully we're doing something better than that in this conversation, and hopefully we can bring to bear something by way of, I don't know, radicalization, by sort of churning against like the sort of insanely violent neoliberal tide that we live in our societies. But, and for like the few thousand people who will see this, maybe that does that. Maybe their minds were already made up and they just came to like get some of this. But like, you know, we can, it's okay that that we're just those Pyrenees dogs. It's okay that we're like just barking at each other and it feels good to like play our role for once. Like, that's fine. I think that's okay. Like, that's, if that's what we can do in our society, that's what we can do. Now, mind you, like, I'd like to think that there is teaching going on. I just said this, but like, I'll say it again, that like, we do have something by way of passing on information and sharing information. And if we can create platforms where, you know, the bloodthirsty, insane liberals won't come and bother us, like, that's good. We should do that. Like, we should do more of that. We should populate YouTube with more of these shows, just in case they knock us down. So, like, it's not a nihilistic position, what I'm saying. I want to make that clear, that, like, it doesn't matter what we say or think. But, like, ultimately, it matters to us as individuals to find a place to say these things, because we shouldn't be biting our tongues. Like, I waited way too long to do this episode, and we should actually like get into the conflict, because Justin, I know you've spent a lot of time talking about it, and we should, if you want to, I don't know if you've prepared for this, but like maybe an overview, maybe an explanation, I don't know, like, or maybe something that caught your eye that you think that is a useful thing. Maybe we could do that in a separate episode. But I don't know. I feel like I want to move on the conversation from the realm of like, can you believe this funhouse mirror we live in? Like this, like
we have,
you know,
we have our information grievances, but then there are several. You know, if we want to think of like our own education, so watching this for me has been like a lot of like, I cannot believe this is actually happening. I cannot believe, like, in a sense, it's like, okay, there's a lot to be doom and gloom about. But on the other hand, it's like, this is America's military that we thought was on another level, better than everybody else. And it's as if I'm understanding what's been happening over the past 2 years, it's not true. So like before this conflict, like my worldview was always based on a kind of, you know, the only hope for the world. It was very hubristic. I'm a little bit ashamed of it, like, but it was based on like the only hope for the world is a Western anti-war bloc, because the imperialist power is so disproportionate to what the rest of the world has economically and militarily, that there's no way that they can do it without a powerful internal anti-war movement in US, Canada, etc. Europe, sorry. I knew there was somewhere I was missing. Now, what's happened in the past 2 years is like, I was wrong on both counts. On the one hand, I don't think there is, like, I don't see any anti-war bloc. I don't see any sign of it on the horizon. I think it feels to me, again, my instincts are that, you know, that period might just be over. Like, I don't know what it was that led to it. Like, maybe it was the Cold War and communism and various other things going on that I didn't fully understand. But like, I don't see that, you know, strong internal opposition happening on the horizon. But on the other hand, I do see that, relatively speaking, China and Russia are now surpassing the US militarily and economically. And that I also absolutely did not anticipate. So like, militarily, is that your sense of like what's going on? Like, is it your sense that like certain assumptions, like expeditionary war, like the US projecting its power anywhere it wants, they can project a certain amount of power, but if you're in Eastern Europe, what you can project is nothing compared to what people who are already there have been doing. And like, spending 10 times more than all your other rivals combined doesn't generate 10 times more military power, because everything you do costs more than 10 times as much. So the numbers have been deceptive, the finances have been deceptive, and the military situation has been very, very surprising to me. I mean, nothing's surprising to me on that front anymore. But like, have you guys had the same reaction?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's kind of unthinkable to this point that like a proxy war heavily funded by not just the US but Canada and the European Union, these kind of like previously untouchable forces of global imperialist hegemony and military force in the world, has been unable really to do what it intended to do in 18 months in Russia.
They're like, we're sending the Leopards, we're sending the HIMARS, and the
Right.
Russians are just like, cool, we'll blow those up too. Whatever.
Yeah,
you send us,
exactly.
send it.
And there was a point that my colleague Ali Abunimah made early, I think it was like early at the beginning of this year, when the US was planning on sending this like, the shipment of Abrams tanks or something like that. It takes about 18 months to train someone, I think it was 18 months, to train someone to use these high-tech, vehicles. And like, so they're completely unusable, as well as other weapons that the Ukrainian military isn't prepared to use or can't use in the terrain that they're trying to use it. Like complete. So it's just like this, like, it's like Monty Python almost, if it wasn't so tragic and horrifying and bringing us to the brink of all this catastrophe. But they keep sending it, hoping that maybe the F-16 fighter jets will be the thing that topples Russia. It's really interesting that, for example, looking at kind of like other regions in the world, especially, West Asia, we saw the Chinese broker the ceasefire between Saudi and Yemen. The US was nowhere to be found. The Chinese are becoming really this like very prominent. Yeah, exactly. Right? They're becoming this very powerful force of diplomacy, of economic, power. And I mean, it could, I thought from the beginning that like, it'll probably be the Chinese government that brokers whatever sort of treaty between Ukraine and Russia. And again, this will make the US and the EU look like, the assholes that they are, completely ineffectual, throwing money at, I mean, this is like, European colonialist thought, right? You throw money and weapons at something that you want to destroy. It doesn't always work. There are other people on this planet.
No, it doesn't. I have learned a lot too since everything started, I have to say, because I was working at the European University Institute when before this, the Russian intervention took place, and I remember working with a group of think tanks which were Polish and Israelis over Ukraine. And it wasn't my focus. I was focusing what was happening in Libya and North Africa, but I was seeing the kind of narrative that was shaping up. And it just, when Justin is talking about instinct, I was like, this doesn't sound right. They just, why did they keep talking about, the Russia? We really need to think how when Russia is going to intervene. I'm thinking, seriously, there is something here that's not right. And then, you fast forward 5-6 years after, and actually this is what happens, in February. And I'm thinking, all right, now I started to put the pieces together and read and learn more. And you really understand how First, what really struck me was how Nazi and fascist at the core we are. I mean, I know maybe the global south has always understood this because they lived it on their skin. But I don't know. I think there is an awakening on that sense that we really have the seeds of fascism and Nazism inside our political liberal system. And even when I look at Italy, it's really right there. So the idea that you can cheer when you see a Nazi, somebody who's actually thinking about freedom and independence in these terms, and you are in solidarity with that, it's chilling for me. It's literally chilling. And this is where I really oppose any kind of statement between solidarity with Ukraine, solidarity with Palestine, and equating these two things. It's wild to me. It's literally wild. And then it's the first time that probably I am aligned with the Vatican, which has the same position as China on what is happening. They are calling for an anti-war. Like, let's find a solution. I mean, Wojtyła was a CIA agent, and we knew that. It was Solidarność, the whole Polish experience. We knew there was a connection there. But now you can see that I agree that the balance is changing, and we are waking up to this. But when you have a bully, when will this bully stop and look at itself in the mirror and say, I think we still need that anti-war from within, Justin? I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe, I don't know. I'm tired. I'm just going to leave it there.
No, but alignments are interesting. The alignments question is another genuine intellectual question that I have that I can throw out for you guys, because I have like the military analysts that I've been following on this war, the people that like follow it and have like a realistic or often a little bit pro-Russian side to it are a lot of them are very pro-Trump. A lot of them are very anti-immigration, like anti-immigrants. They're like obsessively anti-LGBTQ, like just
obsessive.
Like yeah. What is your problem? Yes. I don't get it. But it's like, so there's some kind of like Russian, I think, and then like Russian nationalist conservative that like also is very anti-West, anti-imperialist because they're Russian and they know the West despises them no matter what they believe. So they're not like, they've gotten to this point. I think they would have been happy to make some kind of accommodation, but I feel like that's the group that's like gotten to the point where they realize there's no hope of ever reconciling with the West. But on the other hand, like they have very, what I think of as like kind of, I associate with like reactionary and white supremacist and ultimately imperialist views on a lot of topics. So every once in a while, I'll be listening to these things and I'll be like nodding along, and then I'll be like, "Whoa, what the hell? Where the hell did that come from?" Yeah. So how do you guys deal with that one?
It's interesting. In this country, we have the anti-war on Ukraine cabal within the Republican Party and the far right in the US. And you're like, how does that square up? Because again, they're like,
and a lot of what they say makes sense on this one thing.
Exactly. Yeah. But when you really listen to them, what they want is to divert the focus and attention and the weapons and the money that is being poured into the Ukraine war into a war with China. Yeah. So that's the pivot. Like they're like, we're wasting all of our time. Zelensky is a clown. Okay, agreed. But what they really want is a war with China in order to secure our, the U.S. global economic domination. And so it's like incredibly disingenuous, obviously, but it also it sucks so bad, because then the Democrats are like, oh, you support Putin, just like the worst of the worst in the GOP. Like, so then it just serves to like degrade whatever's left of the left even further. Where like all of a sudden they think it's like the horseshoe theory, that we're so far left that, that we agree with the fascists and the GOP. It's so bad.
I want to add the fact that there is no way, there is no way out of the fact that violence, intensifies this masculinity. And I've seen, especially, I agree with you, Justin, on that front completely. Even in Italy, it's not so much the China part, like what you were saying, Nora, but I'm seeing the transphobic, the anti-LGBT, really, they're really getting back to this kind of Russian nationalism, traditional values. Let's go down with the US. And then there is this support for Russia, which is really like, I don't know if I should call it unsophisticated. It's just pure violence. You know what I mean? It's just like football kind of.
It's anti-liberal on principle. Like it's just to own the libs.
Yeah.
And that's also like
that's it. Anti-liberal.
It's also just like the part of the problem here is, going back to the original question, is that we lack both the grammar and the syntax for political subjectivity. Like a coherent, like you're trying to square some political circle that can't be, because like the nature of our political system is one of contradiction, right? Is on the one hand, you have this supposedly enlightened, like the US, right? You have this enlightened project of breaking away and ostensibly anti-imperial in a sense, but it was in reality, it was a counter-revolution done on the part of a class of white slave owners and a class of a capitalist class, a burgeoning one, a small but burgeoning one, ultimately, that's unfolded over the course of 200 years. And it's grown to the point where it's asserted a power where its agenda, its own political agenda, as contradictory as it is, right? So they're white supremacists, and a lot of people who support Russia are also racist and white supremacists. But that's not the overriding, that's not what we'd like to think of as the overriding logic. It's maybe the idea of whiteness doesn't necessarily break the logic here, because it's a lot of European whites fighting a lot of other European whites. Now, mind you, we have to be a little bit more sophisticated here, because the racial topography of Russia is not the racial topography of its opponents in a sense. However, it doesn't matter anyways, because America's war machine is a Benetton ad of browns and blacks and whites and gays and straights, and it doesn't the actual ability to line up with some sort of political coherent vision. It doesn't exist. This is something that we create on ourselves. Now, is it important to create it yourselves? Maybe you can make that argument that I don't want to be part of some nationalist reactionary community. Now, this is where I'm going to throw a wrench into all of this. What does it matter what I feel about what should be the coalition of people fighting, let's say, the Banderites in Ukraine? What does it matter to me what those people think about the question of sexual minorities, or what does it matter to what does it matter ultimately? Because my subjectivity here, and this goes back to the second thing Justin said, and we said it a while ago, is that our position in all of this is one of viewership. It's one of viewership and analysis and critical distance. So you don't necessarily have to find yourself in the same political alignment on different issues, right? Because we're talking as individuals, but the thing we're discussing is this world historical process that looks far beyond the individual motivations of the people participating in it. So the reactionaries, and I've known this too with my Twitter feed, because I follow a lot of freaks, and the obsession with fighting the libs on their own terrain, and finding people who support them. And so for instance, now you have this weird thing that happened in Canada. And again, this is also culture jihad stuff, because culture jihad is what we're allowed to partake in often, right? Culture jihad is one of the central arcs of neoliberal political subjectivity, because this issue that you hate, go and scream your fucking head off, and go nuts, and put your flag up and make it your entire political identity, right? And so in the vacuum of capitalist life, we're only allowed to grab onto these cultural jihad vectors, right? So what's happened is that the foreign policy, what we call foreign policy, right, has been folded into the culture jihad, right? So the liberals marshal their forces and use it to fight their wars. And in the case of Ukraine, they've gone whole hog and they've conscripted all of their forces, right? And the same way that like Iranian liberals did it too. Iranian liberals arrayed with everyone, every opponent of theirs. That's why they're okay holding hands with Zionists. That's why they're okay, but here's the thing, like in this an interesting case study, like the moment Iranian people started, like Iranian diaspora people, that is to say, in big cities across the West, whenever they would congregate on like these mass demonstrations, right? And by mass, I mean, let's say a few thousand, right? Because these aren't that big and Iranians don't constitute that big, but let's say a few thousand people. What happens at these fucking things? They all start fighting. The monarchists fight with the MKO, and they fight with the left, and like it's just this hilarious scene because they've made a temporary alliance around hating the Islamic Republic, right? In their performance of politics, and in the case of Iran, it's amplified to the nth degree by the Zionist media, right? And by like our imperialist media machine. So you feel very validated that like, wow, the news is on my side for a change. Oh my God, right? Like the news is fighting for justice. I gotta see this fist, but we all know what that is. We recognize the Gene Sharp stuff, but like ultimately the same problem persists. Is you have to create a coalition that then overthrows your enemy, right? And like the very fact that like so much of how we engage these things is through diaspora communities. So like Demetrius Lascaris going around and giving like a series of like basically anti-war talks, right? Saying that like I don't support this, like I don't support Ukraine. And of course people losing their minds. And like you would have go people now, like these are all the vectors and the consequences of our you know, the hollow nature of neoliberal subjectivities. Like all we have to grapple onto is like rage and whatever and outrage and like the thing on TV that I like and versus the thing on TV that I don't like. And this is the thing we're stuck in. So trying to locate coherence in like the people that are ostensibly giving you a higher or like a better picture than our liberal media. Yeah, like you're not gonna find that. Like those Islamophobes who are like marching with Muslims against trans people, like they're going to turn around. Like 20 years ago, they were throwing firebombs at masjids, and also half the time they weren't masjids. They were like Hindu temples or Sikh temples half the time, because what the hell to them, brown person is a brown person. But like this now thing has now inverted where you have like, you know, conservative, ostensibly right-wing, we say social conservative here, like Muslims siding with reactionary whites because they for their own reasons don't like having LGBT stuff. They don't like seeing it. They're personally against it. So we're stuck in this thing of like, oh, you want like the cult of the individual. You want everyone to like feel validated and like scream at how proud they are. People are going to be proud about how much they hate that group. Like that's the natural consequence of like a society built around expressing yourself and your own individual opinion. Now, what the short circuit in all of this is the fact that there are a class of people who have an inordinate amount of power over the legacy media, over a mainstream media, and they have the rapid ability, they have an incredible ability. It's not always perfect, it's kind of ugly at times, but they do have, this is one of the realms where they do have a lot of flex, right? So like so they've gone whole hog on Ukraine, exposing how politically reactionary they are in their hearts. Now, this was clear to me before. I mean, liberals are the ones who give money to the white helmets, right? Like that's liberals, right? Like this is a class of people who dominate a certain sphere of our society, who have an overarching, but ultimately like their own agenda is basically unpopular. And most of the things they agree on with reactionaries like are solved, right? Like, oh yeah, let's like, you know, it's not like there's so little political about our society and our civilization, like our moment right now. So all you can do is just fight. You can do culture jihad and fight. And I've found that it's actually made me these last year, 18 months, I've actually grown really like cynical about everything. It's like, what's the point? What's the point when we're in this madness? And I've been finding myself podcasting less. I've been finding myself like less interested in sharing this stuff because it's like, what's the point? I'm shouting into the void. Now, it's okay because you can create a community of people and it doesn't have to be a void. You know, like this conversation is like a result of a community that like I've managed to create around like my show, thankfully, and that was a good thing. However, I don't think I'll be able to find a coherent line through that. Like the people who are fighting Zionists most effectively are probably reactionaries, and they probably agree with the anti-LGBT stuff. Like I think in reality, like the people doing like the most militant.
Oh, you mean
right?
like Hamas? Or
It's
something,
like
Hamas or
Islamists,
Hezbollah or
right? Like the Islamist question, right? Like it's not so like I'm not going to sit there and be like, oh my god, it's terrible. Like I'm not going to participate in that. Just if only because it's a. And I'm not saying that's what you guys are doing, but that's the lot. That's also like the problem here is that like we're not able to square all this stuff, and we shouldn't try.
Matteo had his hand up for a bit, but let me just say, feed it back to Matteo, because you started off by saying, what does it matter what we think? And the thing is, like, you know, I was in my own mind, at least, and I think others would have agreed. Like I was a pretty good campaigner. Like the idea of like anti-war campaigning, it was something I got pretty good at, you know. And like I always it's like in my head still, I can't kind of help but think like of trying to get back what it would take to get back to huge demonstrations, huge anti-war demonstrations, which I don't know. Again, maybe that's just because I did that a lot and got good at it, and that's the way that I kind of orient myself. But like I still think about that, and the reason I'm depressed personally is because I just don't see a path from here to there on any timeline that I can imagine. So anyway, that's one thing. But that's the collective side. On the individual side, the reason I point out the problematic nature of some of the politics of some of the people that I follow, and sometimes, Nora, they are anti-China too, but like sometimes they're like quite solid across the board, Africa, China, Russia, etc. But then like really seem to come from a place of like hating American Black people and hating, you know, and like just thinking Native people never existed. So like America's like basically a white country oppressed by Black people or something, right? Like, so there's like, anyway, blah, blah, blah. My point in saying any of this is, for me, I'm just trying to figure it out, like for myself. So for me, like I go on the internet, including your podcast, Sina, before we knew each other, like I go on the internet to educate myself. You know, I go on the internet to figure out how things are and how they work. And when I talk on the internet, it's part of that process, and I want to help other people do the same. So for me, it's not like, okay, and not everything I do is like a calculated tactical campaign intervention, although I do those too still, even though it might be based on delusions of grandeur or whatever, like my little newsletter, you know, an emergency podcast on some topic or another. But for the most part, it's like, can I trust these people? Or like, how do I decide how, you know, where somebody like this is coming from a place of genuine knowledge? Or are they just saying this, as you said, Sina, because liberals are against it, so they're for it, or liberals are for it, so they're against it? Those are my reactions to what you said, but I want to hand it over to Matteo too.
No, I was just gonna, I don't know, it probably connects to what I was saying earlier, to the fact that I came to a realization that, you know, when we say we live under capitalism, you know, it's like we like to think of socialist alternative, but at the same time, we do live under capitalism. You know, the reality imposes itself on us. In a way, what I just want to say, it's not a question of trying to square, because the contradictions are going to be there constantly. But what I've realized in the past 18 months is that we live also under a cultural fascist tide. And that, you know, goes back to the syntax the grammar that we were talking about earlier, that there is no way to get out of it. Sometimes I sound fascist myself, according to me. It's, you know, in a way, when I find myself, you know, in the moment where, you know, somehow like history imposes itself and you have this war happening, and the moment you are put in a box where anti-war is pro-Putin, you are already fascist in the eyes of somebody else. So I don't think we can escape that, and I don't think we can square. But I mean, I know Justin wasn't trying to do that, but I do agree with the fact that I also struggled a lot, and also I'm surprised when I consistently find someone able to really analyze and to propose a vision of that reality, which I agree with. But then all of a sudden, bam, you're like, oh God, no, please, where's this coming from? But yeah, Sina, the last thing is that we also, let's not forget how we brought it on ourselves with the fact that, the other day, the spokesperson of the US Army to Ukraine is a trans man. It's just, like, we're not helping ourselves.
Yeah. Well, that's it. It's like, the thing is, that's part of the liberal strategy too, right? So it's like
make it about identity politics.
Yeah. But also to hide behind, like they use, like, you're supposed to protect oppressed constituencies, but liberals hide behind them, right? Liberals try to use them as a way to pass more regressive policies in terms of, imperialism and economic oppression. So what ends up happening is, everybody's trying to own the libs, and there's this kind of collateral damage, because everything the libs introduce, including Black Lives Matter, rainbow, LGBTQ, those also become like contemptible along with the Nazis in Ukraine and being pro-Israel and pro-apartheid, all of which are part of the liberal package as well. So it's like, here's the liberal package: Nazis in Ukraine, apartheid Israel, deflation, impossible rent, impossible debt. You're never going to own a house or have stable housing or employment. And also LGBTQ and Black Lives Matter. Okay, guys?
Women
do you
life
like
freedom.
this?
You forgot women life freedom.
Yeah, women life freedom. Do you
Exactly.
like this package, or are you thumbs up for this package, or are you thumbs down on this package, right?
Right.
And it's like, hey, let's do what liberals like and unpack this package. Can we unpack this package and give
if
yay
you're
or
not
nay
enthusiastically, if you're not enthusiastically thumbs up to all of that, then you're completely dropped. Then you're part of the Trump nation.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess I have one other kind of thing, which is like I've had a better prediction ability since I embraced what you might call being a tankie or whatever. Like pre-tankie, I had some really bad predictions. I thought there was no way the Taliban would win. I'm on record saying there's no way the Taliban will win. I think I'm on record saying Modi's probably not going to win a second term. I think I've got and in late 2021 and very early 2022, I'm on record saying there's no way Russia's going to invade Ukraine. So that's post-tankie, though, by the way. So, but all of that said, I'm going to venture a prediction, which is I think Russia's going to win this one. I don't think Ukraine can win this. I don't think Russia's gonna leave eastern Ukraine. I don't know whether Russia's gonna go and take the rest of all of the Russian-speaking parts of Ukraine. They might. I don't know. Maybe they will. Maybe they won't. But like the Donbass, I don't think Ukraine is gonna dislodge Russia from Donbass. I don't think Ukraine is gonna dislodge Russia from Crimea. So, where's that, like, where are we gonna go from, like, what does that mean? What does that mean for the world? What do you guys think?
I think the verb here that is the troubling thing is win, because we're thinking like normal people, and we're like, oh, what are your military objectives? And did you win them? Were they achieved? Like, we think like we're playing Command and Conquer. It's like 1993. You guys know Command and Conquer? Maybe not. You none of you. But like, it's like
but
a video.
You're making fun of it. But this is not just. It's not a video game. This is also how the Russians understand.
No, but winning for the U.S. is sacrificing countries so they put their war machine on display, and then they flex on their rivals and de-develop their rivals and make them more dependent on the things that make America wealthy. America is winning the war. America is winning the war in a sense. However, they're losing it if the goal is to weaken Russia. But it's the question of what do you see the intent. So I don't think the Americans lost in Afghanistan. They parked in Afghanistan for 20 years. Yeah. They parked in 20 years. They got their.
No, they lost. They lost. Well, they lost.
But they did. I don't think. I also have even more controversial opinion is that they also didn't lose in Vietnam. Because
no, that's not that controversial actually.
I think the idea of losing and winning is faulty here because the nature of the, and this is what Matteo opened with, is that the nature of neoliberal, of like the late capitalist machine we're in, needs war. It needs war to fuel it, and the war. It doesn't matter. You think they care that like the children of Lvov are losing their legs?
Before you go on, let me answer you because
he knows I'm going to go on.
This is John Elmer and I from The Brief, the show that Nora and John run now. We've debated this too, and I had your position for a long time. John actually convinced me otherwise. First of all, are we talking about, like, when you talk about American and Anglo and Canadian and European imperialists, are you talking about almost like a different species where winning and losing are different, and like, you win by like psychotic genocidal sacrifice of like the people of Ukraine mainly in this case, but like, the horrific destruction of countries is winning, losing huge numbers of soldiers, whatever is not losing, etc. Yeah, I agree with you. Like, they do have a different worldview, and it's not a normal worldview. Like, it takes a lot of training to go from like a human, normal, empathetic instinct, or even like a belief in, realpolitik, to that worldview. Agreed. However, what I think we're seeing now, which is what's so interesting, is like there's this psychological narrative, financialized, all this kind of propaganda type of imperialism that they do, that I think is hitting limits of actual hard power and the real world, the real economy in China, real military power in Russia. And so as a result, this contest is actually like, how far can narrative power go when there's a brick wall of military power in front of it? And how far can narrative power go when actual production of stuff and actual resources are now under the, have moved to a different part of the world, a different center of power. So that, I think, like, I know what you mean. I understand fully what you're saying about, the US hasn't lost and isn't losing. But what I'm saying is, this is actually bigger than that. This is not like Vietnam. This is like, Afghanistan is part of this process. Yes, Afghanistan 2021 is part of this process. But these losses, I believe, are real losses, like, by any definition.
No, I agree with you. Go ahead. Go ahead, Matteo.
No, I was just gonna say that there are probably two reactions that I have. One is I don't know. I guess as somebody who really has been trained with the Domenico Lo Surdo text, it depends on the trajectory, obviously, of the analysis that we're doing. So, if we put Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Ukraine together, we start seeing a certain path, and that's a type of analysis that we're going to have. But I know this is not the one we're doing here. We're not looking at the longest. We're talking about this war, and I think that. This is, I'm just going to throw a few scenarios according to what I'm seeing. One is there is a clear division. It's coming up between the so-called older Europe and Eastern Europe. And I think the US might exploit that division and throw another country into the war if they want to, so they can keep fueling that conflict.
Poland.
Poland is on hype on that front. Another one could be opened in Taiwan. So, but at the same time, the real loss also opens much more contradictions within. So, you know, we like in the sense that once you see that this war is not going anywhere, hopefully, and I say really fucking hopefully, the people will wake up and they will say, okay, enough of this. Now you have to go all out of this. We don't need these wars anymore. So I think that the contradictions will open up, and the loss and the win will switch according also to the stages that they will be taken. But I don't think it's a problem of talking about win and lose in a way. I mean, I see what you're saying there. That's my reactions anyway.
I mean, ultimately, it's like the what is the nature of the U.S. imperial project is what we're kind of getting at to, and that's a big question, and it's evolved drastically over our time. And part of its own evolution has been dialectically linked to its adventurism of the last 30 years, right? Like the U.S. enjoyed, when we talk, like if we're living, we're not going to be living, but the people who are going to be living 200 years from now will look back and be like, do you remember that brief moment of U.S. power? Do you remember what they did with it? They're going to look at like the trail of destruction. It's like the meme. It's like the meme of like the death, you know, going from door to door. And like, that's what they did. That's the only legacy will be that. But the thing is, once you zoom out of that meme too, you realize that's what the US has always done, which has been like a trail of destruction behind it. And so what's funny now, what's actually crazy to watch in the Ukraine thing is that like all of the wars that they try to keep quarantined to the global south with all the browns and the blacks and the yellows that they could sacrifice en masse and lie about, right? Like it's okay to do it in Iraq and stuff and whatever. But eventually, like they ran out of easy targets, and the desperate and the linking, and we haven't talked about Syria, right? Syria and Ukraine are linked in a sense, is that like these are desperate attempts to break or to find and locate and create a sorry, there's like a mosquito bugging me. I want to terrorize it. But like these are attempts to isolate and locate and plant a loyal ally right beside their enemy, right? Like that was the attempt. It was the attempt to put a nice like Al-Qaeda beside them that's going to point the weapons, not facilitate weapons shipping to Hezbollah, which is what Syria has been doing and shipping their own to, but also, and so kill Hezbollah, but you also have some friends who are going to point some missiles that are from a very large country and point them directly at Iran. And that's what Azerbaijan incidentally has become.
Can I just jump in? Because I just wanted to enjoy that moment where like Al-Qaeda, I believe, or maybe the Islamic State accidentally shelled Israel and then apologized publicly.
Amazing,
Sorry.
Isn't it?
Sorry.
And then Israel took in the Al-Qaeda and ISIS fighters who had been wounded by the Syrian army. Right. Yeah. It's just you can't make this shit up.
And and all these regime change ops are I think they're a mark of, I would feel that like a power that is desperate to try to change some fundamental, like there's like a few Jenga pieces left of the world that the US doesn't have, right? And they can't pull them out directly because it'll all fall, right? To use a tired metaphor, but like it can't do that. So it just can nibble at the ones that are around that one. It can just nibble at them and go at it. And this like twin project of Ukraine and Syria, these linked things, right? Where like, and what's so crazy about this is like liberals, and you started off this way, is that liberals, like they invested their entire ethical foreign policy principles onto right to protect, right? Like right to protect is everything for them. Oh, we got to protect the Kurds. We got to protect the Syrian Sunnis. We got to do this. We got to protect them. It's all protection, right? Libyans, we got to protect them, right? Like, but like what happened was, the irony of that is that like, and Putin himself said this in one of these things in, what's their big yearly forum? St. Petersburg Forum? I can't remember. It's like the big place. Oh, the Valdai Club. I can put it in the clip if I can find it. But basically he was like, yeah, Kosovo, they let a genie out of a bottle because, we can do the same thing. We're going to do a right to protect, and we're going to protect these people. So what happened is that like America did the thing America does, which was backed people who would ally with it. The people in Ukraine who ally with it are anti-Russian, like America, right? Like you make an ally. But those people are not people who who are otherwise, a lot of those people these go anathema to liberal ethics, supposedly, right? Banning the language. Like, it's bad to bad. Like, could you imagine if, like, Canadian Anglo speakers banned French? Could you imagine what that would look like? Here they bend over backwards to perform this thing of, oh, we're a bilingual country. We're not a bilingual country. There's a part of the country that speaks English, and there's a part of the country that speaks French, and that's it. And the part that speaks French also speaks English too, because they have to. Okay, like, this is like a, and so, like, part of that. Could you imagine if Justin Trudeau started passing legislation saying no more French, can't teach in French, can't even speak French, don't even fart in French, like, could you, which is like the kind of things that, like, the Ukrainian government since 2011, since the Maidan 2, have been doing.
That's speech by Poroshenko, right? Our children
it's insane. These are not liberal values, right? But liberals root against them because they hate Putin. They want to own Putin. That's what it's about. It's just childish, simplistic. There's no coherence to it. There's no strategy. That damn fly. But, like, this is a crazy moment of, forget hypocrisy. It's not about hypocrisy, because there's no human subject who can hold everything together. You can't congeal a singular worldview, right? That's called like, if you can, you're a fascist, right? Because ultimately that's the only thing that can square every circle. It's just you kill everybody who doesn't fit into your machine, right? Like, like, liberalism and its supposed values are nowhere at stake, and yet, right, they took down their Black Lives Matter flags, and they put up their Ukraine flags. They took down their support frontline workers signs, and they put, like, support Banderites in support Azov in Ukraine. Like, it's a crazy world, and it basically bespeaks, I mean, what we've been saying all along is that it bespeaks a fundamentally illiterate audience who claims to hold certain worldview, but obviously like contradicts that worldview whenever it comes into contradiction with their pre-perceived notion of who is an enemy. What were you going to say, Justin?
Just to get back to the military situation by way of conclusion, because, like, Matteo mentioned, you guys mentioned Poland. The thing is, Ukraine, several of the military analysts aforementioned but never named, again deliberately, have said, like, Ukraine is the best proxy that the West has ever had. It is the soldiers, they however big or small the Nazis are in this army, the soldiers are tough, they are fanatical, they are nationalist, they are motivated. They have been trained by.
You mean Nazis, by the way?
Look.
Don't worry about that. No. It's complicated. You wouldn't understand. Yeah.
But, like, the number of casualties that they've taken and continue to fight, right? Like, the equipment, like, there's, like, waves of equipment now, but they've been training and equipping Ukraine since 2014 and before. And, like, they had a thing before that in 2008. Like, the history, we've always since 2022 we've been like, this history goes back to 2014. Actually, it goes back before 2014. Anyway, yeah. But, like, the Poland isn't gonna do the job any better than Ukraine is where I'm headed. Like this is gonna go. There's no reason to think Poland will militarily succeed where Ukraine couldn't. And, like, if America could go and put boots on the ground at some point, I feel like they probably would have done it already. So I also don't think that, like, this is gonna, like, there's the escalation potential. Like, again, I think we could wake up one morning and, and be like, oh, I guess we did end up have that nuclear exchange or whatever. But short of that, like, a lot of what the US can throw at Russia now is just going to go the same way as what they've thrown so far. So it's just like,
I agree.
Where I see this going is, like, Russia's going to impose whatever they want at this point. And, like, I feel like the longer it takes in some ways, like, obviously it's tragic. It's tragic for Ukraine above all. It's tragic for the tens of thousands of Russians that are dying. It's tragic in all these ways. But, like, the longer it goes on, the more psychologically prepared maybe the West will be when Russia finally says, listen, we were able to do whatever we wanted all along here, and we're going to do it as follows. And, like, if there's a little more time for Westerners to prepare for that, maybe that's not
Before the
such a
nukes
bad thing.
arrive.
Yeah. You know, like if
Please,
you're, you know,
God.
it's like, you know, I hate this analogy, but like when you're taking care of someone who's old and you know they're going to die, it's like a lot less of a shock
Yes.
when they finally go than like if they die, if someone you love dies in a car accident, right? Like they're both awful and horrible, but like if it is a long disease, then like you have time to grieve along the way. And like I'm hoping that like the length of the war is long enough for the West to kind of grieve the fact that they don't dictate.
Can I
goes on in
just
the
jump
world.
on this
Yeah.
metaphor?
Yeah.
I hope the
Yeah.
abused wife of Europe will divorce from the husband of the US.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I hope that
That-
the US, you know, it gets into some sort of like rehab and reconciliation program.
Grieving. It is
Grieving,
grieving.
exactly.
But Nora, do you remember 20 years ago when we were like, maybe we can't influence the US, but maybe the EU can influence what's going on in Palestine?
Yeah.
And
Yes.
now that's also funny. Like to think that we thought that, it makes
Yeah.
me kind of like, why did
They
we
called
think
it
that?
the quartet. Remember the
Yeah.
That's
quartet?
right. Remember
Why
that?
did we think that?
US,
Yeah.
EU,
Yeah.
Great Britain, Russia. All
It's
the people
yeah.
who supplied Zionism with its foot soldiers, literally all the major forces were like, oh yes,
I'm
we are
embarrassed.
the interlocutors.
I'm
Yes.
Yes.
embarrassed at myself. I'm
No,
embarrassed at
it's
myself. for
because
having
we
believed that.
thought that they were maybe a little more civilized. Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe,
Yeah.
you know, this like European, you know, Europhilo.
The scumbag European in the room has something to say.
Exactly.
They're worse. They're worse,
Exactly.
and they're not independent. More importantly than the fact that they're worse,
Absolutely.
is that they're not independent at all.
No, we're not. No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
No,
So-
we're not.
Occupied. They're
amazing.
occupied by the U.S. They're an underling of the U.S. and they call it freedom. They have an entire. They erected an entire like political supraclass of elites, and they decorated it with elections. They spend hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions, maintaining this administrative farce called the EU. When in reality, it's Uncle Sam and his German and French pit bulls, who sometimes he likes to pit against each other, which is like the funniest
beautiful.
thing in the world,
Yeah.
right? Like that. Like this is like I say this a lot on the show, but like I can think of no like more poignant. What's the word? Ironic. I don't know. Ending for the continent that took over the planet and like created the U.S. literally. Like it, like the way that like you know the story of Freddie Mercury, how like the mom was like jailed in like a mental asylum and she was raped for like a weekend or something. She was a nurse or something, and like that's Freddie Mercury, or Freddie is like the Freddie Mercury. I said Freddie is like the spawn of like 1,000 whatever. Like it's a stupid misogynist thing, but like ultimately like that's what it feels like America is. America is like this demon that was created from the genetic goo called Europe, and the genocidal project first became one that was a domestic project, right? It was first domestic, and then it was always exported, but it was always exported and domestic. But now, when the U.S. specifically, right, like its own hegemonic project is that it took over. It didn't just take over the continent, right, that it's on, right, because Canada and Mexico are its just satellites, right? We know this. But like it took over the whole hemisphere, right? It took over the whole Western hemisphere. And for a while, it took over the Northern hemisphere. Also, if you include Europe and you subtract, you know, the parts of Russia and China, which is like kind of fake to do. But ultimately, like it enjoyed this multipolar moment. And really, it was like very short lived. It was probably like what? It's 50s to like the mid 2010s. And in the 2010s, they blew their entire wad, right? Like, so to speak, in terms of all of their power, they like, okay, we can't get Iran, let's go for Syria. Like, we can't get Russia, let's go for Ukraine. Let's just do it all. We can't get China, let's go for Taiwan, right? Like, sure, that was like an older project, like Taiwanese, as like that was like the ostensible goal of keeping Taiwan, obviously, was to like keep an eye on them and, you know, whatever. But, you know, like they can't do this anymore. And the desperation of that machine is now evident. So like, yeah, Europeans, like enjoy the future you created. Like these are your children who are now like deindustrializing your economy. They're like freezing you and boiling you in your own homes because you don't have power to like keep the temperature cold, right? Like they're starving you. Like they're like the US is like as damaging to Europeans as it is to Iranians now, right? Like they sanction their own allies. That's the crazy thing of the US. Like, and then they blow up their, yeah, and then they find politicians who are like, thank you, like clapping like seals, like demented seals. I mean, that's what's so perverse. And then they have like this bevy of fucking liberal losers who follow behind them, throwing flowers at every single like evil thing they do. I mean, it's nuts. We live in pure hell. Unfortunately, our conversations always end like this, Justin. When I talk to you, we live.
Wait, can we end on a? Can we end on a positive note?
On a more
therapeutic.
There's one.
Niger. We should talk about Niger.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Is that like this past week, my spirits have been lifted significantly by what's going on in Niger, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Guinea.
That lifts the Tankie spirits like a series of military coups. A series of
holy shit, are you watching this?
I like that.
It's incredible. It's incredible. And it's not, like, and they are, I mean, really, like they are giving me hope that, that incredibly formerly colonized, countries that have been scarred for hundreds of years by slavery, by colonialism, by imperialism, by militarism, by the theft of resources by the global north, are ready to unite and avenge. And I, for one, really, I'm just watching with bated breath to see what happens in that little corner of Africa.
Yeah, that's gonna be interesting. I mean, they're gonna we'll see what they try to do. I mean, I don't think if Wagner's already there, and I think they might be, because again, here's the little story from Syria that I wasn't able to find again, but I tell every chance I get, which is like Obama was like Assad must go, da 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 da. And then there was like some in-depth debate where they were like, we really want to overthrow Assad before he gets the S-300 or S-400 anti-missile